There's a very specific kind of tension that hits when a story asks you to believe two things at once. That someone can spend 10 years training to become an absolute weapon of a human being and still come down the mountain with this almost embarrassingly pure, wide-eyed hope that love is going to be the thing that finally makes them feel real. That's the emotional gamble Sang Ahli Pengawal takes. And I'm not kidding when I say it hooked me faster than the action ever could. Because the action is just the noise around a person who's starving for a life. You're watching flick flare, and if you end up vibing with the way I break these dramas down, story, performances, the little emotional micro stabs, consider subscribing. No pressure, just. If you're here, you're probably my kind of person. And spoiler-wise, I'm keeping this pretty light to moderate. I'll talk premise, the big emotional pivots the storyline itself sets up, and the way the show moves, but I'm not here to torch the final stretch with gotchas or over-specific reveals beyond what's already in the setup. So, Sang Ahli Pengawal, released in 2026, comes in wearing a familiar outfit. A highly trained fighter, a high-status woman in danger, a bodyguard arrangement that forces proximity, and threats coming from assassins and rival family power plays. If you've watched enough dramas, you can practically hear the trope machinery warming up. But what surprised me is how the story's core isn't, will he protect her? Because obviously he will. The core is, what does he do with himself when protection stops being a task and starts being a relationship? And even more pointed, what happens when love is something you want, not something you're trained for? Zhang Shao's premise is clean and almost mythic. 10 years of training. Then he descends the mountain. And he's not descending because he wants to conquer a city or avenge a master or prove he's the strongest. He's descending because he's looking for love. That detail matters because it immediately frames him as someone who's been shaped by discipline but not by ordinary life. He's competent in the ways that don't automatically make you happy. He can survive. He can fight. He can endure. But can he belong? And then the story throws him into Lan Xine's orbit. Director Lan Xine, a woman with enough power and visibility that danger makes sense around her. Again, classic. But the way the storyline positions her is what makes it work. She isn't just a target. She's a person whose professional success is exactly why she's being hunted, which instantly turns every romantic beat into a question about agency. Because if your identity is built around being capable, what does it do to you to need a guard? Here's where I'll give the show credit right away. The bodyguard setup isn't just a convenient excuse for closeness. It's a philosophical argument in disguise. If someone steps into your life and says, "Your safety is my job," that can feel like devotion. And it can feel like surveillance. It can feel like comfort. And it can feel like control. A weaker drama plays that purely as swoony fantasy. Sang Ahli Pengawal has enough self-awareness to let the discomfort breathe, even while it still delivers the fantasy. And let's be real, it also knows exactly why people click on a title like this. The idea of a protector is hot. It just is. I'm not above it. I'm the target demographic for competent man stands between you and the world, and I hate that I'm that predictable. But I'm also picky, because the protector trope gets ugly fast when the woman becomes a prop for male heroism. The good version is mutual. She gains safety, he gains humanity, and neither loses their dignity in the trade. If you stick with me, the interesting part isn't the assassins or the rival family. It's the way the show uses those external threats to force an internal negotiation. What does it mean to love someone who is also a responsibility? Zhang Shao, who's saving Lan Xine, is the inciting emotional contract. And even without getting precious about exact staging, the moment has a specific flavor that the show leans into: the sudden compression of space, the sense of time snapping into focus, the world going quiet except for movement. It's the kind of scene where your body tenses before your mind catches up. You see him clock the danger. You see her realize she's not alone. And there's this instant where the story tells you this is what he's built for. But it also tells you, in the same breath, And this is going to ruin his life in the most beautiful way. Because after that rescue, becoming her bodyguard isn't just logical. It's fate with paperwork. One of the smartest choices in this kind of drama is how it handles competence. A lot of shows make the male lead so absurdly overpowered that the stakes feel fake. Or they make everyone else incompetent so he looks good, which is the cheapest kind of wish fulfillment. Sang Ahli Pengawal, at least as it's presented in this storyline, keeps the pressure on by stacking threats from multiple angels. Literal assassins, yes, but also the rival family, which implies status warfare, reputation traps, and that slow, suffocating kind of danger where nobody pulls a knife. They just tighten a system around you until you can't breathe. And that matters for Lanik Sign. Because director isn't just a title here. It suggests she's used to being in charge, used to decisions having consequences, used to navigating rooms where people smile while they calculate. So when the story makes her the target of violence and conspiracy, it's not just physical danger, it's a threat to the world she's built and the authority she's earned. I want to pause on the love angle, because a man comes down the mountain seeking love can easily turn corny if the show isn't careful. But if you interpret it the right way, it's actually kind of devastating. 10 years of training is 10 years of isolation, 10 years of repetition, 10 years of being told your feelings are distractions, or at least secondary to your purpose. So when Jung Shaohu goes looking for love, it doesn't read like a goofy romantic quest to me. It reads like a person trying to find proof that he's more than a tool. And that's where the drama starts quietly asking, is love something you deserve because you're good at protecting? Or is love something you have to learn how to do when protecting isn't enough? There's also a tonal tightrope here that I appreciated. Because a bodyguard drama can go either ultra-serious, grim, sleek, all threat and trauma, or it can go fluffy with occasional action beats. This storyline suggests Sang Ahli Pengawal tries to live in both lanes, romance and success on one end, assassins and conspiracy on the other, with a family emotional thread running through the mother's awakening. That's a lot of plates to spin, but when it works, it creates this satisfying sense that the character's life is finally becoming whole. Love, career, family, purpose, all colliding. And yes, I'm going to talk about the mother element, because it's not just a random tearjerker add-on. He Awakens His Mother is the kind of plot beat that can be purely melodramatic, but it's also thematically loaded. It hints that Jung Shao's fight isn't only out there in the world, it's rooted in something personal, something unresolved, something he's been carrying since before he ever started training. Let me throw a question at you that the show implicitly toys with. If you spend your whole life preparing to protect others, who protects the part of you that's still just someone's child? A lot of modern dramas love the fantasy of self-made strength. But self-made is usually a lie we tell to make hardship feel noble. The mother thread, in a story like this, can function as a reminder that even the toughest person is formed by softness somewhere. And when the story later ties his external victories, foiling conspiracies, surviving threats, to something as intimate as waking his mother, it's basically telling you, all this violence and power only matters if it restores something human. Now, let's talk about Lanik Sign as a romantic counterpart, because this is where these dramas either become addictive or unbearable. The director archetype can be written as cold and untouchable, ice queen waiting for a warm man to thaw her, which I personally find lazy unless it's handled with real nuance. But the storyline hints at something better. Lanik Sign isn't just distant. She's under threat. She's in a professional environment where vulnerability can be weaponized against her. So emotional caution isn't just personality, it's strategy. That makes the bodyguard dynamic sharper. Because if she's used to managing risk through control, and he's used to managing risk through force, you immediately have a relationship built onto different languages of safety. She reads a room. He reads a stance. She anticipates betrayal. He anticipates impact. They're both scanning for danger, just with different instruments. And when do people like that fall toward intimacy? It's not just romantic. It's disorienting. It's like trying to sleep while still listening for footsteps. One thing I'll say, maybe a little contrarian, but I mean it respectfully, is that the obvious reading is Jung Shahu is the savior. He saves her, guards her, dismantles threats, wins love, wins success. Very hero's journey. But I actually think the more interesting read is that Lan Xine is the one who saves him, just in a quieter currency. Because he comes down the mountain looking for love like it's a prize, but what he actually needs is to be seen in a context that isn't training. He needs someone to treat him like a person, not a weapon. And a woman who runs things, who chooses things, who has the authority to define roles, she can do that for him in a way nobody on his mountain ever did. In other words, even when he's protecting her body, she might be protecting his soul. And that shift, when the show leans into it, is where the trope stops being a trope and starts being a relationship. There's also something deliciously tense about the director label versus the bodyguard label. Titles imply hierarchy. A director gives orders. A guard follows orders. But romance doesn't care about your org chart. Romance messes up your structure. And if the drama plays fair, there should be moments where that hierarchy becomes a problem. Moments where he has to decide whether to obey or to insist. Moments where she has to decide whether to command or to ask. And when those moments are written well, they're not just spicy. They're character. Now, since I'm keeping spoilers on a leash, I'm not going to pretend I can walk you through every twist of the conspiracy or exactly how the rival family operates. But the broad strokes already tell you the story's shape. Rescue, protection, escalating threats, conspiracy reveal, personal family catharsis through the mother, and then the emotional payoff of love and success. That's a classic escalator structure. Each rung raises the stakes, first her life, then her world, then his past, then his future. What makes that structure satisfying is pacing, when the show knows when to sprint and when to breathe. And Ahli Pengawal, in concept, has built-in opportunities to do both. Action sequences and near-miss threats naturally create sprints. But the bodyguard premise also creates forced stillness, waiting outside doors, riding in cars, standing in silence, existing near someone without touching them. That's where you get the good stuff, if the actors can carry it. Because bodyguard romance is, at its best, about proximity without permission. There's a certain kind of scene this genre always needs, and Ahli Pengawal is practically begging for it. The moment where he has to stay stone-faced and professional while his emotions get loud, and the moment where she has to act composed while her fear almost cracks her voice. Not because fear is sexy, but because vulnerability is. And the best dramas don't confuse the two. They let fear be messy. They let attraction be inconvenient. They let devotion be terrifying. If you've ever watched a drama and realized you're holding your breath during a quiet conversation, that's what I'm talking about. Let me give you a mini scene the way the emotional beat lands, without pinning it to overly specific plot mechanics. Picture the aftermath of a threat. The air still feels wrong, like the room hasn't accepted safety yet. Lan Xine is trying to speak like a director, measured, clipped, practical, because that's how she survives. Jung Shahu is doing that hyper-aware stillness trained people get, where you can tell he's listening to everything at once. And then there's a small sound, maybe a door settling, maybe footsteps far off, and he moves before thought. Not dramatically, not for show, just an instinctive shift that places his body between her and the unknown. And you see it hit her, that he's serious, that he's constant, that his presence is not a metaphor. It's a wall. And here's the punch. Instead of that being purely comforting, it's also intimate in a way that almost embarrasses them both. Because it's one thing to be admired. It's another thing to be guarded like you matter. That's the emotional engine right there. Now, I want to talk about how a show like this can accidentally lose its own point if it gets addicted to plot. Conspiracies are fun. Rival families are fun. Assassins are fun. The problem is, conspiracy plotlines love to multiply. More players, more secret motives, more reversals. And if the story isn't careful, Lan Xine stops being a character and becomes a chessboard. Zheng Xiao stops being a person and becomes a solution machine. But the storyline includes two grounding anchors that, to me, are the sign of a drama that at least understands what it's doing. 1. The mother awakening. 2. The explicit mention that he seeks love and wins love alongside success. That second part matters because it frames emotional fulfillment as an outcome equal to external victory. A lot of shows treat romance as decoration around the real plot. This one, by premise, treats romance as the plot's reason to matter. And yeah, I'll admit something that surprised me about my own reaction. I didn't expect the success part to land emotionally because I'm usually allergic to neat, shiny, and they prospered endings in stories that deal with violence. It can feel like a reward screen. But here, because Zheng Xiao begins as someone who has trained but not lived, success can be read as integration. Not just money or status, but the sense that he can exist in the world without being swallowed by it. And if Lan Xine is already successful, then the question becomes, what kind of success? Is it success that costs you peace? Is it success that paints a target on you? Is it success that forces you to harden? If the drama has any bite, it won't just celebrate her position. It will interrogate what it has taken from her. That's where the romance can feel like a risk for both of them. For him, love is unfamiliar terrain. For her, love might be a vulnerability she's trained herself not to afford. Quick self-aware aside, I know I'm describing this like I'm writing a thesis on yearning, but listen, that's what happens when a drama gives me a competent lead who also looks like he hasn't been hugged properly in a decade. I don't make the rules. Let's swing over to performance nuance, because this kind of story lives or dies on micro behaviors. If Zheng Xiaohu is played as just stoic and cool, the seeking love premise collapses. He has to have some visible awkwardness around normal life. Something his posture, his timing, the way he watches people talk like he's translating a language. Not clownish, not country bumpkin, but genuinely out of practice at being ordinary. And for Lan Xine, the performance needs to communicate two truths at the same time. She is used to being in control, and she is not immune to fear. The actor has to let you see the calculation behind her eyes, the way she chooses words like she's moving pieces. And then, in rare moments, you need that mask to slip. Not in a big sobbing breakdown necessarily, but in a breath that catches, a hand that doesn't quite stop shaking, a voice that gets quieter because she doesn't want anyone to hear the crack. When those performances hit, even a simple scene becomes loaded. A walk down a hallway becomes a negotiation. A conversation becomes a test. A glance becomes an admission. There's also an aesthetic promise baked into a mountain-to-city story. You're moving from isolation to density, from natural space to constructed space, from clean purpose to messy desire. And even without inventing specific camera tricks, you can feel how a drama like this wants to contrast environments. The calm of training versus the noise of modern power. That contrast is thematic. It's the story's argument made visual. The world he's entering is not pure, but it is alive. And the bodyguard job is the perfect lens for that. Because being a guard is literally being positioned at the boundary between a person and the world. Doors, thresholds, crowds, cars, lobbies, liminal spaces. It's intimate without being private. It's protective without being free. Here's a rehook that I think is worth sitting with. The most dangerous thing in this story might not be the assassins. It might be the idea of duty itself. Because duty is Zheng Xiao's comfort zone. Duty is simple. You do the thing. You endure. You win or you die. Love is not like that. Love is ambiguous. Love requires listening. Love requires changing. And when someone like him attaches love to duty, when he starts to believe that protecting her is the same as loving her, that's where trouble starts even if the threats outside never existed. The storyline says he protects her from assassins and a rival family. It also says he foils a conspiracy. Those are plot functions, yes, but emotionally, those are opportunities to test what kind of protector he is. Does he protect by deciding for her? Does he protect by removing her choices? Or does he protect by giving her information, by trusting her competence, by standing beside her instead of in front of her? And I'm going to push a little here, because it's a point I care about. The most romantic version of a bodyguard is not "I'll handle everything. Don't worry your pretty head." The most romantic version is "I'll be here, and I trust you." If the drama understands that, it earns the love story. If it doesn't, it turns Lan Xien into a passenger in her own life. Now, the rival family element is a spicy ingredient, because it suggests this isn't just random danger, it's structured. Family rivalries tend to be about legacy, inheritance, reputation, and control. They're also the kind of antagonism that can't just be punched away, even if you have a guy who can punch through walls. That's good. It forces the drama to expand beyond physical fights into strategy, alliances, and emotional manipulation. It also mirrors Zheng Shao's own family thread, because when you have a rival family threatening Lan Xien, and you have Zheng Shao's mother needing to be awakened, the story is, into different keys, talking about family as both weapon and wound. And that's where the conspiracy comes in. He foils a conspiracy is broad, but it implies a turning point where the threats aren't isolated incidents anymore, they're connected. The story shifts from reactive protection to proactive unraveling. That's often the mid-game gear change in these dramas, where the bodyguard stops being just a shield and becomes an investigator, a disruptor, sometimes even a public figure. That shift can be thrilling, but it also challenges the romance, because the more public and involved he becomes, the less he can remain a silent presence at her side. The relationship has to adapt from "I'm here to guard you" to "I'm in this with you." And that's a different intimacy. There's also a subtle emotional irony in the premise that I really liked. Zheng Shaohu comes down the mountain seeking love, and the first major act he performs is violence adjacent, saving someone from killers. It's like the story is asking, can a person trained for combat enter love without dragging combat into it? Not in the sense that he's abusive or anything like that, but in the sense that his instincts are always going to be shaped by threat assessment. If you've ever been around someone who's had to be on guard their whole life, you know what I mean. Even in calm moments, their nervous system doesn't fully stand down. They're present, but they're also braced. So, in a romance like this, a lot of sweetness comes from seeing him learn softness without losing strength. And a lot of sweetness comes from seeing her accept protection without losing authority. And if the drama wants to be emotionally honest, it should also show how hard that is. Because softness feels dangerous when you're trained for danger. Now, the waking his mother beat. I'm going to treat it carefully, because it can mean a lot of things. And I don't want to invent medical specifics or circumstances the storyline doesn't confirm. But emotionally, it's a loaded promise that Zheng Shaohu's personal arc doesn't end at romance. He's not just there to complete Lan Xien's story. He has his own wound, his own longing, his own unfinished business. And when a drama gives the action hero a mother thread, it often becomes the one place the character can't win through toughness. You can't punch your way into healing. You can't outtrain grief. You can't discipline your way into not needing someone. That's where the character either deepens, or the show fumbles and turns it into a cheap tear. My hope, based on the storyline's emphasis, is that Ahli Pengawal uses that moment to collapse the distance between protector and son. Because those are two different identities, and both can trap you. As a protector, you're valued for what you can do. As a son, you're valued for existing. If his mother awakening is framed as a reconnection to being valued without utility, that's not just sentimental. That's character development. And I'll be honest with you, this is where I felt something personal kick up. I'm not usually the person who cries at plot mechanics. But anything that touches the idea of a parent waking up, physically or emotionally, hits that part of me that thinks about all the conversations people never get to have. All the "I'll say it later" that becomes "I didn't get the chance." So even the concept of that beat, when it's handled with patience, can land like a quiet punch. And because Jung Xiaohu is introduced as someone seeking love, the mother element also becomes a subtle commentary on what love has looked like in his life. Was he loved through absence? Through sacrifice? Through expectation? Did training become a replacement for family? Was the mountain his escape or his exile? The storyline doesn't specify, so I'm not going to pretend it does, but the mere inclusion of mother awakening invites those questions. Also, there's something narratively satisfying about the symmetry. He saves Lan Xine early, and later he's positioned as someone who can wake his mother. Saving and waking, protection and restoration. The story wants him to be a man who doesn't just stop death, he brings life back into the room. Okay, but let's go back to Lan Xine, because her side of the arc matters just as much. And it's where the romance either becomes empowering or turns into a fantasy that only serves him. A director under threat is often forced into isolation. You can't trust your staff. You can't trust your circle. You can't trust your own schedule. And then this one person appears, Jung Xiaohu, whose loyalty is direct, almost old-fashioned. It's not transactional in the way corporate relationships are. It's "I said I'd protect you, so I will." That kind of loyalty can feel like oxygen if you're surrounded by politics. But it can also feel like a trap if you're used to being the one who controls the terms. So the show's best potential tension isn't just romantic teasing, it's ideological. What does Lan Xine believe about power? What does Jung Xiaohu believe about love? If her power is strategic and social, and his power is physical and personal, how do they respect each other's methods? Because if he ever treats her like she's naive, the romance soars. And if she ever treats him like he's a disposable tool, the romance collapses. The sweetness is in mutual recognition. She sees he's more than muscle. He sees she's more than a target. That's why I keep coming back to the idea that Lan Xine might be the stealth protagonist of Jung Xiaohu's emotional growth. Not because the story is hers more than his, but because she represents the world he's trying to enter. The world of choices, consequences, and complicated intimacy. And then you add the rival family and conspiracy, and you get a pressure cooker. Because nothing reveals character faster than stress. When threats hit, people default to their training. He defaults to action. She defaults to control. And the relationship becomes this ongoing negotiation where both have to unlearn something. Here's another rehook. Because this is the point where the drama's true identity reveals itself. Is Sang Ahli Pengawal actually a romance with action? Or is it an action story disguised as romance? They're not the same. In a romance with action, the action exists to intensify intimacy, to force honesty, to strip masks. In an action story disguised as romance, the romance exists to humanize the hero while the plot does the real work. The storyline's emphasis on love and success suggests the former, but the way the conspiracy is handled will make or break that promise. And I'll tell you what I look for as a viewer. Do the quiet scenes change the characters, or are they just breaks between fights? If you want to know why bodyguard dramas can feel addictive even when the plot is simple, it's because the setup creates a constant excuse for small, repeated acts of care. Not grand declarations. Not "I would die for you" speeches. It's the water bottle, the coat, the hand guiding someone through a crowd without grabbing, the presence in the corner of a room, the way someone notices you're tired before you say it. That's where intimacy is built, repetition. And Jung Xiaohu, coming from 10 years of repetitive training, is actually uniquely suited to that. He already understands devotion as repetition. The show just has to teach him that love isn't repetition of duty, it's repetition of choice. The assassin's element naturally provides the adrenaline, but I hope the drama doesn't make the danger too random. Random danger is exciting ones. Targeted danger is emotionally meaningful. If the threats are connected to Lan Xine's position and the rival family's agenda, then every attempt on her becomes not just "oh no," but "this is what power does to people." It becomes commentary. Success brings risk, visibility brings violence, and being a woman in authority invites a specific kind of hostility. That's a theme the show can touch without becoming preachy. It just has to let Lan Xine be smart. Let her be angry. Let her be strategic. Let her have pride in what she's built. And let Zheng Xiaohu respect that, even when it scares him. The storyline says he thwarts a conspiracy. And I love that phrase because it implies more than survival. It implies he actually disrupts a system. And that's where success can become complicated. Success for whom? For him personally, yes. For her, maybe safety and stability. But if the conspiracy is tied to a rival family, thwarting it could also mean shifting power dynamics in a larger way. Again, I'm not going to invent specifics, but I will say the best conspiracies in dramas aren't just puzzles. They're moral tests. They ask what you're willing to sacrifice, who you're willing to trust, and what part of yourself you're willing to compromise to win. And that's where a love story becomes real. Love isn't romantic when everything is easy. Love is romantic when it costs you something, and you still choose it. One more thing about Zheng Xiao's down the mountain origin. It sets him up as someone who is, in a sense, pre-modern. He's trained in a tradition. He comes from a place that values discipline and maybe simplicity. When he enters Lan Xine's world, director, rivals, conspiracies, he enters modernity in its sharpest form. Optics, influence, wealth, and the violence that hides behind polite language. So he's not just learning love. He's learning society. And that's where the show can find humor without turning him into a joke. There's a kind of gentle comedy in competence being misplaced. Like when someone is incredible at the hardest thing in the room, but slightly lost in the easiest thing. Not in a, haha he's stupid way, more in a, he's human way. The best version of that is affectionate. And it also makes the romance warmer because you see Lan Xine relax around him when she realizes she doesn't have to perform perfection. It's intimate to be imperfect in front of someone who doesn't punish you for it. Now, musically and atmospherically, a drama like this usually lives on contrast. Tense rhythms during threat sequences, softer motifs during proximity scenes, maybe even a recurring emotional cue tied to home and family, which would naturally align with the mother thread. I'm not going to pretend I can name tracks or pinpoint exact instrumentation without the show putting it in my hands. But I will say this, the soundscape of a bodyguard drama matters more than people admit, because so much of the tension is about listening. Footsteps, silence, doors, distance, the absence of sound when you're waiting for danger. Silence is romantic in these stories. Silence is also terrifying. And when the show understands that, it can make a simple moment to people standing in the same room, not speaking, feel louder than a fight. Here's what I think Ahli Pengawal does best. Conceptually, it refuses to let Zheng Xiao's strength be the end of his arc. Strength is his starting point. His journey is about what he does with it. Does he become gentler? Does he become wiser? Does he learn restraint not as discipline, but as respect? Because restraint is the sexiest form of power in a bodyguard romance. Not the ability to hurt, the ability to choose not to. And that's why the love story, if written with care, can feel earned. Zheng Xiaohu doesn't get Lan Xine as a reward for saving her. He earns a relationship by becoming someone who can stand near her without trying to own her life. And Lan Xine, in turn, earns love not by being rescued, but by allowing herself to be witnessed, by letting someone see her fear and ambition and exhaustion without turning it into a performance. The storyline ends with he gains love and success. And I know some people roll their eyes at that kind of clean outcome. But I actually think it sets a high bar because it means the drama has to show us a transformation strong enough to justify that dual reward. Love and success at the same time only feels satisfying if the characters have paid for it with growth. If they get both without changing, it's fantasy fluff. If they change, it's catharsis. And I'm not against fantasy fluff, by the way. Sometimes you want sugar. But this premise has the bones of something more nourishing. Let me circle back to the rival family angle one more time, because it's also where Lan Xine's characterization can shine. Rival families don't just attack you physically, they attack your reputation. They isolate you. They create doubt. They make people around you nervous to associate with you. And if Lan Xine is a director, her reputation is a form of currency. So protecting her can't only be about stopping blades. It has to be about preventing a narrative from swallowing her. Which gives Zheng Xiaohu a challenge he's not trained for. You can't fight rumors with fists. You can't block a smear campaign with a body. You need strategy. You need patience. You need to accept that some battles are slow. And that is a genuinely interesting way to force the mountain warrior archetype to evolve. It's not enough to be strong. He has to become socially intelligent. He has to become emotionally intelligent. He has to learn that protection sometimes looks like letting someone take the lead. That's also where the show can depain the romance, because learning her world is a form of love. Not just longing, not just chemistry, effort. Another confession, since we're here. I'm always moved when a story portrays love as education. When someone learns your language. Not just literally, but your habits, your fears, your boundaries. It's one of the few things that still feels romantic to me as an adult, because it's not flashy. It's just attention. And attention is rare. So as the threats escalate, assassins, rival family pressure, conspiracy tightening, the best scenes, in my opinion, aren't necessarily the biggest. They're the scenes where you can see the relationship trying to survive the pressure without turning into something ugly. Where Lan Xine insists on her agency. Where Zheng Xiaohu insists on her safety. Where both of them are right, and neither can fully win. That's real tension. And if the mother awakening is placed well in the story's momentum, it can act like an emotional lens that reframes everything that came before it. Because suddenly, Zheng Xiaohu isn't just fighting for Lan Xine, or for justice, or for victory. He's fighting for the possibility that the people you love can be returned to you. That loss isn't final. That life can soften again. That belief, however the drama chooses to stage it, can change the tone of the romance too. It can make Zheng Xiaohu less desperate, less hungry in a way that clings. It can make him calmer, more present, more able to love without gripping. And it can also make Lan Xine see him differently. Not as an invincible protector, but as a man with a tender center. There's this quiet truth in a lot of these stories. The moment a powerful woman truly trusts someone is often the moment she becomes most dangerous to her enemies. Because she stops fighting alone. She stops being isolated. She stops being manageable. And that's why the romance can be political. Not in a slogan way. In a power way. I'll stop here for now on one specific, lingering thought that I don't want to rush past. When a character like Zheng Xiaohu wins love, I don't actually care about the winning. I care about what he learns to stop doing in order to be worthy of it, what impulses he outgrows, what fears he finally names, what version of strength he leaves behind, as he becomes the kind of man who can stand beside Lan Xine without making her smaller. Because the kind of man who can stand beside Lan Xine without making her smaller is also the kind of man who doesn't confuse proximity with entitlement. And that's where I think Sang Ahli Pengawal gets quietly daring, even inside a very familiar fantasy. It's not simply asking, will they fall in love? It's asking, can they fall in love without turning each other into roles? Because the bodyguard role is seductive in a way that can flatten both people. He becomes the shield. She becomes the one who is protected. And if you let that harden, you don't get romance, you get a dynamic. A functional arrangement with sparks. Real romance, the kind that sticks in your chest, is when they step out of the arrangement and meet as to full, stubborn, complicated adults. One of the most underrated tensions in bodyguard stories is consent. And I don't just mean physical. I mean the consent of being watched. The consent of having someone track your movements, anticipate your decisions, decide what's safe for you. Even when it's well-intentioned, it's still a form of intrusion. So if this drama is emotionally honest, it should let Lan Xine push back sometimes. Not because she's ungrateful, not to create artificial conflict, but because any competent person would eventually say, I didn't hire you to replace my will. And if Zheng Xiaohu is written with any depth, he's going to have to learn the difference between I'm protecting her and I'm managing her. Those aren't the same thing. Protecting is an act of care. Managing is an act of control. The line between them can get blurry fast when danger is real and your nervous system is calibrated for emergency. Here's the thing that keeps me watching when this genre is done well. The romance isn't built on him proving he can fight. It's built on him proving he can listen. And the show's premise sets up a really good listening arc. Because someone who trained for 10 years on a mountain probably learned to listen to wind, to footsteps, to intention, the physical language of threat. But listening to a woman like Lan Xine is different. It's listening to what she says and what she refuses to say. It's listening to her pride. It's listening to the way she keeps her voice steady when she wants to scream. He's going to misread her sometimes, not because he's dumb, but because emotional life is a different kind of terrain. Now, if you've ever had a relationship where one person is intensely solution-oriented, you already know the friction. The moment you express fear or stress, they jump to fixes. Do this, don't do that, I'll handle it. And you're sitting there thinking, I don't want you to solve me, I want you to sit with me. That's exactly the trap a protector character can fall into. And because Zheng Xiao's identity is built on being useful, on being effective, on being the difference between life and death, he might subconsciously believe that being loved is conditional on being necessary. That's not romantic. That's heartbreaking. And it's also where Lan Xine's character can become the emotional teacher without the show turning her into a therapist. She doesn't have to fix him. She just has to respond to him as a person. To treat him like he matters, even when he's not actively saving anyone. If this drama is playing at a high level, it will give us moments where he's sidelined, where he can't solve a problem with his skill set. And we get to see who he is when he's not the answer. That's where you find a character's real face. Let me rehook you with a question that changes how you read the whole show. What if Zheng Xiao's greatest enemy isn't the assassin with a blade, but the belief that his only value is what he can do? Because if he believes that, he'll throw himself into danger not just to protect Lan Xine, but to justify his place in her life. He'll be addicted to being needed. And that's the kind of devotion that looks noble until you realize it's also self-erasure. This is why the success piece in the storyline matters more than it seems. He gains love and success sounds like a neat bow, but it can also be the resolution of that self-worth issue. Success can be the thing that tells him, you have a place in this world that isn't just standing in front of bullets. It can be the thing that lets him build a life instead of living inside constant crisis. Of course, success can also be its own danger. If Zheng Xiaohu becomes successful in the city, his identity shifts from anonymous protector to visible person. And visibility attracts threat in a story that already has rival families and conspiracies. It also changes the romance dynamic. It's one thing to love someone who's yours, quietly, privately. It's another thing to love someone whose life becomes public, or complicated, or politically inconvenient. And for Lan Xine, already established as a director, success is not a shiny reward. It's the arena. It's the battlefield. It's where the threats are born. So, success, in her context, probably doesn't feel like celebration. It feels like responsibility and sometimes isolation. Which is why the romance has a chance to feel like relief. And also like risk. One detail I keep coming back to is that Zheng Xiaohu goes looking for love first. Not revenge. Not justice. Love. That makes him emotionally proactive in a way a lot of action leads aren't allowed to be. Usually, male leads in these stories accidentally fall in love while doing their mission. Here, his mission is love. That's kinda bold. And it creates an expectation. He's not just going to react to Lannick's sign. He's going to yearn. He's going to choose. He's going to want. The challenge is making that want feel grounded instead of childish. The easiest mistake is to write him as naive, like he's read about love in a book and now he's doing a checklist. But a more interesting route is to write him as emotionally sincere but socially untrained. He's not a baby. He's a grown man. He's just not practiced. There's a big difference, and you can feel it in performance. It's in the way he might hold eye contact a second too long because he doesn't know the polite exit ramp. It's in the way he might take words literally because mountain training taught him clarity, not subtext. It's in the way he might treat promises like vows because his world is built on discipline and consequence. And Lannick's sign, on the other hand, probably lives in subtext. She lives in implications, optics, and strategic ambiguity. So watching those two languages collide can be genuinely entertaining without needing sitcom antics. It can be romantic friction, to people trying to meet in the middle. If the drama nails that, it becomes less about he's strong and more about he's sincere, which is the rarer fantasy, honestly. Another thing, in a good bodyguard drama, the physical blocking tells you the emotional state before the dialogue does. Where he stands, how close he allows himself to be, whether he positions himself as barrier or companion. Whether Lannick's science steps around him, behind him, beside him. Those are choices. Those are story beats, even when nobody says a word. And you can feel when a director understands that language. The camera starts to treat space like a character. Hallways feel longer. Doorways feel like thresholds. A car ride feels like a confession booth. Even a simple office can feel like a cage if the framing keeps putting Lannick's sign behind glass, behind desks, behind barriers. I can't confirm exactly how Ahli Pengawal shoots those scenes without getting into specifics the storyline doesn't provide, but the premise practically begs for that kind of visual storytelling. It would be a waste not to use it. Here's a small, human observation that always makes me laugh at myself. I'm ridiculously susceptible to scenes where the protector character is forced to sit still. Like, you can give me the cleanest fight choreography in the world, but what gets me is when the guy who's trained to move is told, stand down, and you see the restraint physically hurt him. It's like watching a storm forced into a bottle. And restraint is where romance lives in this genre. Let's talk about antagonistic pressure for a second. Assassins and rival family is broad, but it gives you two very different flavors of threat, and that matters for pacing. Assassins are immediate. They spike adrenaline. They create scenes where the bodyguard's competence can shine. Rival family pressure is slower and dirtier. It creates paranoia, tension in rooms, the feeling that anyone could be an asset or an enemy. If the show balances those well, the story doesn't get monotonous. You get alternating rhythms. Sprint, simmer, sprint, simmer. The romance can grow in the simmer. The bond is forged in the sprint. And then, foiling a conspiracy suggests that at some turning point, those threads stop feeling separate and start feeling like a web. That's when a drama often shifts from case of the week danger into a more serialized, momentum-heavy narrative where choices start to compound. If you're still with me, this is the point where I'd normally warn you. Some dramas get addicted to their own conspiracy and forget the relationship. They start stacking revelations like trophies. But Ahli Pengawal, at least in the way its storyline is described, seems to keep the emotional goals in view. Love, mother, success. Those are not plot goals. Those are human goals. Rehook moment. The real question isn't whether Zhang Shao can beat the people trying to kill Lannick Sign. It's whether he can beat the part of himself that thinks love has to be earned through suffering. Because that's a poison a lot of trained warrior characters carry. They feel most legitimate when they're in pain. They feel most valuable when they're bleeding for someone. They confuse sacrifice with intimacy. And a mature romance would challenge that. Lan Xine, as someone who likely understands professional sacrifice, might be uniquely positioned to call it out. She might recognize workaholism in him, even if it's dressed up as loyalty. She might see that he's using danger as a place to hide from emotional vulnerability. Because it's safer to fight an assassin than to admit, I want you. And if the show gives us even a few scenes where the danger fades and the emotional truth becomes the threat, that's when you know it's not just coasting on tropes. Now, about the mother awakening. I want to be careful again, because we don't have specifics, but thematically it's huge. It introduces a kind of tenderness that action plots often lack. And it can also explain Zhang Shao's motivation in a way that makes the romance feel less like a random bolt of fate. If his mother has been in a state where she's not reachable, whether physically asleep, unconscious, emotionally shut down, however the story frames it, then Zhang Shao has lived with absence. And people who live with absence often become fixated on presence. They become hungry for someone who stays. They become intense in ways that can be beautiful and also overwhelming. So when he finds Lan Xine, and he's placed in a role that demands constant presence, it can feel like his nervous system finally has something to hold on to. And if the show is smart, it will make that both romantic and a little scary. Because intensity isn't always intimacy. Sometimes it's just fear in a suit. And Lan Xine, being targeted and living under pressure, might also be hungry for presence. She might be surrounded by people all day and still feel alone, because nobody is safe to truly lean on. A bodyguard is safe in a way colleagues and rivals aren't. But safety can also be complicated. If he's safe because he's paid, is it real? If he's safe because he saved her once, does she owe him trust? Those questions can quietly haunt the romance, even if the show never spells them out. This is where acting nuance becomes everything. You can tell when a drama is good at emotional subtext, because the characters don't say the obvious thing. They say adjacent things. They talk about schedules and security and plans, and what they really mean is, are you staying? Do you choose me? Can I rely on you? Will you leave? And the camera, if it's doing its job, catches the split-second delays. The little swallow before an answer. The way someone turns away to hide a reaction. Those are the moments that make you feel like you're watching to real people, not a romance algorithm. Let me give you another vivid, sensory little retelling. Not a specific canonical scene, just the kind of moment this drama's premise naturally creates. Imagine Lan Xine walking into a bright, polished space, glass, clean lines, the kind of environment that's meant to look untouchable. She's dressed for authority. She's composed. But there's a faint tremor under it, the lingering aftershock of being hunted. Zhang Shaohu is a step behind, silent, scanning. The sound design drops the room tone slightly, like the world is holding its breath. Someone laughs too loudly nearby. A phone buzzes. A heel clicks on the floor. Tiny noises become sharp. Lan Xine pauses at a doorway, like she's deciding whether to cross into a room full of eyes. Zhang Shaohu doesn't grab her. He doesn't pull. He just shifts to the side so she can go first, but his body is angled in a way that says, if anything happens, it hits me before it hits you. And Lan Xine notices. Of course she notices. She inhales, steadies herself, and walks in. And the emotional impact isn't, wow, he's so strong. It's the fact that he's letting her lead, while still making sure she doesn't lead alone. That is the sweet spot. Now, I want to push back on something that viewers often demand in these dramas. And this is my respectful contrarian take for this part. Not every protective act should be framed as romantic. Sometimes it's just trauma responses meeting each other in the middle. A lot of audiences cheer hardest when the bodyguard becomes possessive, jealous, hyper-controlling, because it reads as passion. But there's a difference between passion and panic. If Zhang Shaohu starts making choices for Lan Xine because he's terrified of losing her, that isn't love yet. That's fear. And I actually hope the drama doesn't romanticize the fear too much. I hope it lets it be messy. I hope it lets Lanik Sayan say, "You don't get to cage me in the name of caring." Because the rare, truly satisfying arc is when the protector learns to trust the protected. And the protected learns that accepting help isn't weakness. That mutual growth is the whole meal. There's also a class and culture contrast baked into the setup that can be really juicy if the show leans into it. Jung Shaohu comes from a mountain training life. Sparse, ritualized, probably physically demanding and mentally focused. Lanik Sayan comes from a professional, high-status world, meetings, optics, networks, and pressure that's psychological rather than physical. These are different kinds of endurance. Sometimes dramas make the simple hero morally superior to the complicated city world, like Purity versus Corruption. But a better drama doesn't do that. A better drama admits both worlds produce strength and both worlds produce damage. The mountain produces discipline and isolation. The city produces ambition and paranoia. Neither is inherently better. They just shape you differently. If Ahli Pengawal lets both characters be competent in their own realm, the romance becomes a partnership rather than a rescue fantasy. And if it doesn't, you'll feel it. You'll feel the writing start to tilt, like the camera loves him more than it respects her. Rehook. The moment this drama becomes great is the moment Lanik Sayan stops being the one he protects and starts being the one who chooses. Choice is everything. It's the difference between romance and captivity. It's the difference between he won love and they built love. That's why I'm so interested in how the show handles the wins love phrasing. I don't want it to feel like a trophy. I want it to feel like a mutual decision made under pressure, in spite of fear, with eyes open. Now, let's talk about editing rhythm. Because in a thriller romance blend, editing is basically your heartbeat. Fast cuts create urgency, but can also flatten geography if overused. Longer takes create intimacy, but can also drain tension if they're not motivated. A good bodyguard drama uses editing as a mood dial. When danger is near, it tightens. When emotional truth is near, it slows down just enough to make you squirm. And sound design, again, is the secret sauce. A lot of dramas lean too hard on music to tell you what to feel. The more confident ones let silence do some of the work. They let you hear the environment. They let the tension sit in the air. Because the most romantic moments in this genre are often the ones where the music doesn't interrupt, where the actors carry it with breath and eye contact, and that tiny pause before someone crosses a line. The storyline also suggests the plot has a fairly heroic trajectory. He foils a conspiracy, he awakens his mother, he gains love and success. That's a lot of wins. So the drama's challenge is to make those wins feel earned rather than inevitable. And earned doesn't mean he gets beat up more. It means choices cost something. It means protecting Lanik Sayan forces him to confront his own limits. It means being in her world forces him to develop new skills. It means awakening his mother emotionally changes him, not just gives him a win. This is where themes can deepen the viewing experience. Because thematically, Ahli Pengawal is about duty colliding with desire. It's about competence colliding with vulnerability. It's about power, physical power and institutional power, and what it takes to hold either without becoming cruel. Jung Shaohu has physical power. The risk is he becomes paternalistic. Lanik Sayan has institutional power. The risk is she becomes hardened. Love, in a story like this, is the thing that can soften without weakening, strengthen without controlling. It's also, frankly, about trust. And trust is a bigger deal than love in a thriller context. Love can be a feeling. Trust is a decision you make repeatedly while your body is screaming at you not to. So when the story has them facing assassins and rival families, I'm less interested in will they survive, and more interested in will they trust each other's instincts? Will she trust his threat assessment? Will he trust her social reading? Or will they constantly override each other and create their own chaos? The best partnerships are not to people doing the same thing. They're to people doing different things in alignment. Now, I want to address a potential weakness that sometimes shows up in this kind of premise. The male-led's competence can accidentally erase the female-led's competence because the writers get drunk on the fantasy of protection. If Zheng Xiaohu is always right, Lan Xine becomes an idiot by comparison. If he's always the one who sees danger first, she becomes oblivious. And that would be especially disappointing for a director Lan Xine, because that title implies she is sharp. She should be able to spot agendas. She should have survival instincts in her own way. So the most satisfying version of this dynamic is not she's helpless and he's perfect. It's she's brilliant in her domain, he's brilliant in his. And they each have blind spots the other covers. That's romance that feels adult. And it also makes the story's victories feel more credible. A conspiracy is rarely foiled by one person punching the right guy. It's foiled by information, alliances, timing, and courage. Zheng Xiaohu can bring courage and force. Lan Xine can bring insight and strategy. Together, they can bring disruption. That's the story I hope the drama is telling. On a more emotional level, there's something really compelling about watching someone like Zheng Xiao learn what it feels like to be cared for. Protectors often aren't used to receiving. They're used to giving, sacrificing, standing in the cold. So when Lan Xine starts caring back, however that manifests, it can be disorienting for him. And this is where I want to be honest again. I have a soft spot for characters who don't know how to accept kindness. Because it's such a real wound. It's so human. And it's not solved by one hug. It's solved by repetition, by someone being consistent long enough that your nervous system finally believes it's not a trick. That's why, for me, the romance beats that matter aren't the big confessions. They're the small reciprocations. The moment she notices he hasn't a 10. The moment she asks about his past without interrogating. The moment she gives him a choice instead of an order. The moment she respects his boundaries when he's trying to be professional but clearly drowning in feeling. And yes, he should have boundaries too. A bodyguard romance gets healthier when the guard is allowed to say, "This is too much," or "I can't do that," or "I need you to trust me." Not as a tantrum, but as a person asserting his own humanity. Rehook. If you only watch this drama for action, you might miss the fact that the most dangerous fights are the quiet ones, when they're trying to decide what they mean to each other without ruining what they already have. Because that decision can destabilize everything. Once you admit love, the stakes change. The job changes. The rules change. Professional distance becomes painful. Emotional distance becomes impossible. And in a world of conspiracies and threats, love becomes leverage. It becomes something enemies can use. That's why Vin's love is never simple in a thriller romance. Love is not just reward. It's exposure. This is also where the rival family angle can add a kind of social commentary if the show wants it. Rival families are often about legacy, who gets to own the future. And Lan Xine's presence as a director suggests she's a person who has earned authority, not inherited it. That can threaten traditional power structures. And Zheng Xiaohu, coming from outside those structures, can be both an asset and an affront. The drama could play with the idea that love itself is disruptive. Not because romance is rebellious by default, but because it can break alliances, shift loyalties, and create new centers of power. Now, I want to touch on something about the title itself, Sang Ahli Pengawal. Even if you don't speak the language, the phrase carries weight. It sounds like the expert guard, the professional protector, the archetype. Titles like that often promise a certain competence fantasy. But competence fantasies are only satisfying when competence has a cost. If Zheng Xiaohu is the expert guard, what did that expertise take from him? 10 years of training took time. It took youth. It took normal relationships. It took a chance to be messy and ordinary. It probably took the kind of experiences that make love easier. So the drama's emotional richness, for me, comes from the idea that he's late to his own life. He's arriving at love with calloused hands and a disciplined mind, but maybe a starved heart. And Lanexine, in her own way, may also be late to softness, because success and threat can make tenderness feel like a luxury you can't afford. So you're watching two people learn to be safe with each other in different ways. And that's why I keep emphasizing that this isn't just chemistry. Chemistry is easy. Safety is hard. When it comes to cinematography, I also think a show like this can do something subtle that elevates everything. It can treat violence as ugly rather than glamorous. That doesn't mean you can't have stylish action. But if the show wants the romance to matter, it should avoid making danger feel like entertainment candy all the time. Threat should feel stressful. It should feel like it steals sleep. It should feel like it stains the day. That way, the moments of tenderness feel like actual relief, not just a change of genre. And it also keeps Zhang Shao from becoming a superhero. If violence is always cool, he becomes a spectacle. If violence is stressful, he becomes a person who carries weight. There's a specific kind of short language some dramas use where the bodyguard is always framed as looming, always big, always towering, always dominant. That can be sexy, sure, but it can also make the romance feel predatory if it's not balanced. A more thoughtful approach is to sometimes frame him smaller, or off to the side, or behind her, not to diminish him, but to visually communicate respect. To show that his power is not about taking space from her, it's about offering space to her. Again, I can't claim exactly how Ahli Pengawal shoots every scene based on the limited storyline. But these are the choices that separate trope comfort food from trope with a brain. Now, let's dig into story momentum and structure, because the storyline gives us the spine. You start with 10 years of training, then the descent, then the rescue, then the bodyguard arrangement, then escalating threats from assassins and rival family, then conspiracy, then mother awakening, then love and success. That's a rise and rise structure. The danger of rise and rise is fatigue. If everything keeps escalating, you can numb the audience. So the drama needs valleys. It needs emotional rest points. It needs scenes where the characters process what's happening. Not long speeches, just moments where you see the stress land. That's one reason the mother awakening beat can be powerful structurally. It can function as an emotional pivot, an internal climax that gives the external plot a deeper meaning. It can slow the story down just enough to deepen it, then send it back into the plot with a new emotional charge. Also, awakening his mother is not only a family event. It's a symbolic event. It's about returning to origin. It's about reconnection. It's about the past becoming present again. In many stories, when the past returns, the hero changes. It forces integration. So if Ahli Pengawal is pacing itself well, the mother thread shouldn't feel like a random side quest. It should feel like the story revealing what Zhang Shao has been fighting for all along, even if he didn't know it. And then there's Lanexine's relationship to that. A romance that becomes truly intimate is when you let someone into your family pain. Not just your polished self. Not just your professional self. The messy part. The part you don't know how to solve. If Lanexine is present for any part of that, emotionally, if not literally, it can deepen their bond in a way that action scenes can't. Because seeing someone be a child again, for even a second, is incredibly humanizing. Rehook. The closer Zhang Shao gets to love, the more the story should test whether he can be loved without being useful. And I know I keep returning to that, but it's because it's the heart of it. So many dramas accidentally send the message that men are loved for their function. This story has a chance to challenge that by showing Zhang Shao learning that he is allowed to be tired, allowed to be scared, allowed to be imperfect, and still be held. If the show goes there, it becomes emotionally sticky. Now, about Lanexine's side, director Lanexine implies she has a public image. That means vulnerability is expensive. It can cost respect, leverage, safety. So her arc should involve learning where she can place vulnerability without losing herself. And Zhang Xiaohu, ironically, might be the one place she can be vulnerable because he is outside the reputation economy. He doesn't value her because of gossip. He values her because she's her. That's a beautiful setup for romance. But it also contains a risk. If she starts leaning on him as her only safe place, it can become dependency. So the healthiest version is not that he becomes her entire support system. It's that he becomes part of a broader reclamation of safety. She rebuilds trust. She regains control. She becomes harder to isolate. That would also tie nicely into foiling a conspiracy. Because conspiracies thrive on isolation. They thrive on cutting people off, making them doubt allies, making them feel alone. Love, in that context, is not just romance, it's reconnection. It's alliance. And alliance is power. There's also something I want to say about Win's love from the audience psychology angle. People like this trope because it externalizes devotion. You get to see devotion in action. Not just words. It's a fantasy of being prioritized. And in a world where most of us are constantly being deprioritized by jobs, by stress, by distractions, that fantasy hits. But I think the deeper fantasy, the one that makes a show rewatchable, is not someone would die for me. It's someone would live with me. Someone would show up on a normal day. Someone would stay when it's boring. So I'll be watching for whether Sang Ahli Pengawal gives us life together, moments amid the danger. Not necessarily domestic fluff, but moments of ordinary rhythm, sharing space, sharing routine, sharing silence without it being about threat. Those moments are where love becomes believable. And I want to mention humor again, because the best dramas in this lane have a sense of humor that isn't a tonal betrayal. Not slapstick. Not forced comedic side characters. Just the natural comedy of two people trying to act normal while their lives are objectively unnormal. Like the absurdity of having a romantic conversation while also doing threat assessment. Like the way someone tries to flirt and it comes out like a mission briefing. Like Lan Xayan being used to commanding rooms and suddenly realizing she's flustered by a guy who barely speaks but somehow makes her feel seen. That kind of humor is gold because it makes the characters feel alive. Now, on the craft side, fight choreography, if the show leans into it, should ideally reveal character rather than just provide spectacle. Zhang Xiao's fights should look like training, efficient, controlled, no wasted motion. But as he becomes emotionally involved, fights might subtly change. Not necessarily in skill level, but in intention. You can see urgency. You can see protective panic. You can see restraint when he doesn't want to escalate. And I'm not saying the show has to get that granular, but when it does, it's so satisfying because it turns action into storytelling. On the flip side, Lan Xayan's fights might be social. Negotiations, confrontations, decisions. Her action scenes might be boardroom scenes where the threat is implied rather than visible. If the drama respects her, it will film those scenes with the same intensity as a physical fight. Tight framing, controlled pacing, letting her intelligence feel like power. Because otherwise, you get this annoying imbalance where physical power is portrayed as real and social power is portrayed as fluff. And for a director character, social power is survival. I also want to touch on the romance's ethical texture. Bodyguard romances can sometimes flirt with coercion because of the inherent power dynamic of I'm always with you. The show has to make it clear, through tone, through dialogue choices, through Lan Xayan's agency, that this is not her being cornered into intimacy. It's her choosing it. It's her having space to say no, to set boundaries, to take time. And Zhang Xiao needs to respect that, even if it hurts. Honestly, the sexiest thing a male lead can do in this setup is stop. The moment she hesitates, he stops. Not dramatically, just naturally. Like it doesn't even occur to him to push. That's when the fantasy becomes safe. That's when it becomes something you can enjoy without that little voice in your head going, wait, is this actually romantic? Rehook. The drama's biggest flex would be showing that protection without respect is just another kind of danger. Because respect is the difference between I'm guarding you and I'm honoring you. Now, as the conspiracy thread tightens, again, staying general, the story likely pushes both leads into situations where trust is tested. Maybe there are betrayals around them. Maybe information is withheld. Maybe someone tries to manipulate the relationship itself. That's standard in this kind of plot ecosystem. The important thing is how the leads handle it. Do they talk? Do they coordinate? Do they keep secrets for each other's good, which is the classic relationship poison? Or do they learn to collaborate, to share burdens, to let the other person make informed choices? A mature drama rewards collaboration. An immature one rewards martyrdom. And since Zhang Xiaohu is the kind of character who could easily become a martyr, I'm hoping the story steers him toward partnership. Let him be strong enough to share. Now, the awakens his mother beat also implies some kind of healing or resolution. And healing arcs are tricky in thrillers because they can feel rushed. But if done with patience, they become the emotional payoff that makes all the external chaos worthwhile. Because what's the point of defeating assassins if you come home empty? What's the point of success if you're still emotionally starving? That's why tying his external victories to a family healing is such a good choice in concept. It says, this isn't just about being alive. It's about being okay. And if Lannick's sign is part of his okay, then love becomes less like a reward and more like a homecoming. One more personal note, since I already cracked that door earlier. Stories about people who are hyper-competent and emotionally underfed hit me in a very specific way because I've known what it feels like to be praised for output while your inner life is quietly falling apart. Not in a dramatic, cinematic way, in a boring, modern way. And when a drama portrays a character learning that they can be loved without being on, it's comforting. It makes you feel like the world might have room for you as you are, not just you as you perform. So yeah, I'm invested in that angle. I want the drama to earn that comfort. At the same time, I don't want it to become soft in a way that neuters Lannick's sign's edge. A powerful woman character should not be fixed by love. She should be expanded by love. She should remain ambitious, capable, and sharp. Love should not be the thing that makes her smaller and more domestic unless she chooses that for herself. And even then, it should feel like addition, not subtraction. And Zhang Xiaohu shouldn't be civilized out of his identity either. His training, his discipline, his quiet intensity, those are part of him. Love should not erase them. Love should refine them. It should give them a purpose beyond survival. That's the kind of romance that feels like growth instead of compromise. Rehook. If the show is really paying attention, the final stretch of the story won't feel like they beat the bad guys. It will feel like they became people who can keep each other safe without losing themselves. And we're not there yet. We're still in the part of the story where danger is doing its job. Forcing contact, forcing decisions, forcing honesty. So I want to linger a little longer in that middle territory. The place where the bodyguard arrangement is still new enough to be awkward, but intense enough to be intimate. Where Lannick's sign might still be testing him. Where Zhang Xiaohu might still be learning her rhythms. Where their trust isn't declared yet, but demonstrated. Because this is where the drama can do some of its best work. For example, there's an emotional beat I always look for. The moment the guarded person realizes the guard is also in danger. Not in an abstract, he fights bad guys way, but in a visceral way. The moment Lannick's science sees that Zhang Xiao's life is being spent day by day for her safety. That can trigger guilt, tenderness, anger, fear. It can make her want to push him away to protect him. It can make her want to hold him closer because time suddenly feels fragile. And for Zhang Xiaohu, there's a complementary beat. The moment he realizes that his presence is changing her life beyond safety. That she's adjusting her behavior because he's watching. That she's losing privacy. that she's losing spontaneity, that his devotion has a cost for her too. Those mutual realizations are where respect grows. If the show keeps it shallow, it'll play those moments as romantic angst. If it keeps it deep, it'll play them as ethical reckoning. Now, I'm going to stop at a point that feels like a hinge, because from here, the storyline naturally pushes into heavier territory. The conspiracy tightening, the mother thread rising, and the romance having to either mature or break under pressure. And the most interesting part is watching whether Zhang Xiao's idea of love finally evolves from "I will protect you" into "I will trust you," into "I will trust you." And that shift sounds small until you actually sit with what it demands from both of them. Protection is, in a weird way, easier than trust. Protection is concrete. You can count steps, check doors, scan crowds, intercept threats. Trust is abstract. Trust means you let someone make a choice that might scare you. Trust means you accept that love isn't a fortress you build around a person. It's a bridge you build to them, and bridges don't keep everything out. Bridges are exposure. So when the story starts tightening its conspiracy thread, that's the pressure test I'm watching for. Not can Zhang Xiao fight, not can Lan Xine outmaneuver a rival family. But can they communicate under stress without turning into their worst instincts? Because stress doesn't reveal character. Stress reveals habits. And habits are what you fall back on when you don't have time to be your best self. Zhang Xiao's habit, by premise, is duty. Do the task. Follow through. Endure. If he's scared, he'll try to solve. If he's emotionally overwhelmed, he'll try to act. And Lan Xine's habit, by premise, is control. Direct the room. Manage perception. Anticipate betrayal. If she's scared, she'll tighten her grip. If she's overwhelmed, she'll compartmentalize. Put those together, and you get a couple that could either become unstoppable or become quietly miserable. Unstoppable if they learn to share power. Miserable if they keep trying to take power from each other in the name of safety. Here's the first plays a drama like this can either grow up or stay stuck in tropeland. When Lan Xine makes a risky decision. Not a reckless decision. A decision that is strategically necessary in her world but emotionally intolerable for him. A meeting she has to attend. A public appearance she can't cancel. A negotiation where hiding would look like weakness. And Zhang Xiao, trained to minimize risk, is going to hate it. That's where you find out if he respects her. Because respect doesn't look like agreement. It looks like support when you disagree. And if Ahli Pengawal has any interest in being more than comfort food, it will let that be messy. It will let him be frustrated. It will let her be firm. It will let the relationship strain without turning either of them into a villain. The best writing doesn't pick a side. It makes you understand both. Rehook me for a second, because this is where the show's romantic fantasy gets real. The most intimate line in a bodyguard drama isn't "I'll die for you." It's "I'll follow your lead." That's the line that means he sees her as a person with agency, not a fragile object. And it's also the line that means he's secure enough not to equate leadership with dominance. If he can do that, then the expert guard archetype evolves into something rarer, a partner. Now, the storyline gives us he foils a conspiracy, which implies a turning point where the narrative stops being purely defensive and becomes offensive. They're not just surviving attempts, they're unraveling a structure. And I love that because it forces both characters to take responsibility beyond themselves. When you foil a conspiracy, you're not just saving one life. You're disrupting a network. That changes the ethical stakes. And it also changes the emotional stakes because conspiracies don't just threaten your body. They threaten your reality. They make you doubt what you thought you knew. They make you question your allies. They make you wonder if your choices were ever truly yours or if you were being guided. That kind of paranoia is where relationships get eaten alive if they don't have trust. So the most satisfying version of the conspiracy arc, for me, is one where Lan Xine and Zhang Xiao become each other's anchor. Not in a codependent way, but in a grounding way, where Even as everything outside becomes untrustworthy, their internal bond becomes the one thing that stays consistent because they've chosen honesty as a survival strategy. But the show has to earn that. It can't just declare it through a romantic montage. Let's talk about something that's easy to miss. The bodyguard trope naturally creates a one-way vulnerability at first. Lan Xine is vulnerable to threats. Zheng Xiaohu is the solution. But a good drama flips that slowly. It reveals that Zheng Xiaohu is emotionally vulnerable in a way he didn't even know. And Lan Xine, for all her public composure, becomes the person who can either exploit that vulnerability or honor it. If she honors it, the romance deepens. And you don't honor emotional vulnerability by babying someone. You honor it by taking it seriously. By not laughing when someone doesn't have the words. By not punishing them for being intense. By not turning their need into your power. I'm emphasizing this because it's the difference between protective romance and power romance. And I think Ahli Pengawal, from its premise, is trying to live in protective romance territory, where safety and tenderness are the goal, not domination. Now, I want to zoom into Lan Xine's side again, because the phrase Director Lan Xine suggests something people underestimate. She's probably used to people wanting things from her. Favors, access, approval, opportunity. Even affection can be transactional around powerful people, because everyone is networking, even when they're flirting. So Zheng Xiao's presence, someone whose loyalty reads simple, can feel like a relief. But it can also trigger suspicion. If you've lived in a world where everything has a price tag, pure devotion feels fake. It feels like there has to be a catch. That's such a delicious emotional obstacle for a romance. Because it's not, I'm cold, because I'm cold. It's, I'm careful because I've learned that trust is expensive. So if Lan Xine resists at first, I don't read that as her being unromantic. I read it as her being experienced. And if Zheng Xiaohu keeps showing up consistently, not dramatically, not performatively, but consistently, then her trust becomes earned, not surrendered. Rehook. When Lan Xine finally relaxes around him, even slightly, that's going to be a bigger romantic payoff than any kiss. Because relaxation is the rarest intimacy for people who live under pressure. Anyone can be passionate for a moment. Relaxation is what happens when your body believes you're safe. That takes time. Now, I've talked a lot about trust and agency, but I also want to give the show credit for something baked into its premise that is inherently crowd-pleasing in the best way. It's a story about someone building a life. 10 years of training is, in narrative terms, a closed system. It's a life defined by rules and repetition. Descending the mountain is the character choosing uncertainty. And that, to me, is the romance of adulthood. Choosing a life you can't control because the controlled life is no longer enough. So even when assassins show up, even when rival families squeeze, even when conspiracies surface, the emotional through line can still be Zheng Xiaohu is trying to live. Not just survive, live. And Lan Xine, for all her success, might also be trying to live beyond her role. That's why the success endpoint can be satisfying if it's framed as stability rather than flex. Stability is underrated as a romantic goal, especially in a drama that uses violence and threat. Stability becomes the happy ending that feels like healing. Now, I want to return to the mother awakening beat, because I think it's the most emotionally dangerous promise in the storyline. Not dangerous as in risky for the plot. Dangerous as in it can make or break the show's sincerity. A lot of dramas will use mother as a shortcut to depth. Cue music, cue tears, cue the hero's tragic backstory. But the storyline here places it as an achievement. He awakens his mother. That implies effort, devotion, maybe even a kind of spiritual or emotional persistence. It implies he didn't just stumble into it. He fought for it, in whatever way the story defines fighting. And that's where I hope the drama is brave enough to go quiet. Because the most honest mother scenes aren't loud. They're not always big speeches. Sometimes they're just two people existing in the same room with years between them. Sometimes they're awkward. Sometimes they're unfinished. Sometimes the most emotional thing is a hand being held and not knowing what to say. If Sang Ahli Pengawal plays that beat with restraint, it could be the moment that reframes Jung Shao's entire journey. Not as I became strong, but as I became human again. Rehook. The conspiracy can raise the stakes, but the mother awakening is the moment that tells you what the stakes actually are. Because if you really zoom out, the story isn't about whether Lan Xine survives. It's about whether the characters can reclaim a life that danger and duty have been stealing from them. And yeah, I'm going to admit something else here, because it's relevant to why this kind of beat lands. I have a complicated relationship with earned love narratives. I love them because I'm a sucker for devotion and growth. But I also get wary when stories teach people, especially men, that the path to being loved is to become indispensable, to bleed, to suffer, to save. So if the drama is going to end with love and success, I wanted to also, quietly, unteach that lesson. I wanted to show Jung Shao being loved when he's not in hero mode. I wanted to show Lan Xine choosing him not because he's useful, but because she likes who he is when the room is quiet. That's the corrective. And it also gives the romance longevity. Because if you love someone only as your protector, what happens when you're safe? If you love someone only as your emergency, what happens when life becomes normal? Real couples don't live in emergencies. They live in Tuesdays. So give me Tuesdays. Give me small, ordinary moments where their connection isn't fueled by adrenaline. Now, on craft, this is where editing and cinematography can elevate the idea without adding plot. For example, you can visually track trust by tracking distance. Early on, Jung Shao might always maintain a precise protective spacing, professional, measured, like he's following a rule book. As intimacy grows, the distance can shrink in moments of comfort and expand again in moments of tension. Lan Xine might initially keep barriers between them, desks, doors, social context, and then slowly allow more unguarded proximity. You don't have to say, I trust you. Your body says it for you. Sound design can do the same thing. Early on, every space might feel loud with threat. Footsteps, echoes, sharp ambient noise. Later, when they feel safe together, the mix can soften. The room can feel warmer. Or the show can do the opposite for dramatic effect. Make the world go quiet when danger is near, so you hear breath and fabric and heartbeat level sound. Even if you don't consciously notice it, your body does. Another rehook, because this is a big point. A romance thriller succeeds when it makes you feel like love is a strategy, not a distraction. And that's a subtle but important distinction. In weaker writing, the romance is the part where characters stop being smart. They make dumb choices because love. They hide information because feelings. They walk into danger because I can't live without you. It's exhausting. In stronger writing, love actually makes them better. It makes them coordinate. It makes them honest. It makes them calmer. It gives them something worth protecting that isn't ego. It turns survival into purpose. Sang Ahli Pengawal's storyline implies that Jung Shao's love and his success arrive together, which suggests love is not pulling him off track. It's aligning him. Now, I want to gently challenge the assumption that wins love means gets the girl. It could, sure, in a straightforward romance sense. But emotionally, I think the most satisfying interpretation is that wins love means Jung Shao becomes capable of receiving love. That's a win that has nothing to do with conquest and everything to do with healing. Because a character like this, trained, disciplined, isolated, might not believe he can be loved without proving himself. He might not believe he's allowed to want. He might believe love is something for other people with normal lives. So, winning love can be internal. It can be him letting himself have it. And Lan Xine's win in love can be her letting herself choose it despite risk, despite optics, despite a rival family pressure cooker. A woman in a high-status position doesn't just fall in love. She has to decide whether love is worth whatever it costs her in her world. That decision can be romantic as hell if the show respects her intelligence and doesn't reduce it to "she finally melted." Let's talk about the rival family angle again. Because rival families in dramas are rarely just antagonists. They're mirrors. They represent the social machinery that turns people into assets. They represent the idea that relationships are leverage, bloodlines are strategy, and love is a weakness to exploit. So when a story places a romance inside that ecosystem, it's basically staging a fight between two philosophies of life. One philosophy says, people are tools. The other says, people are people. Zhang Shaohu's mountain training could have been tool-making. It could have treated him as a weapon. Lan Xian's corporate or professional world could treat her as an asset. So both leads could, in different ways, be victims of systems that value function over humanity. That's why their relationship can feel like rebellion without needing speeches. Just by choosing each other as humans, not roles, they're pushing back against their worlds. Rehook. If you want to know what kind of drama this is, watch how it portrays power when nobody's watching. Because anyone can look powerful in public scenes. The real question is, who are they in private? Does Lan Xian drop her mask and become tender? Or does she remain guarded even when alone? Does Zhang Shaohu turn off his vigilance when the door closes? Or does he stay braced like danger is inside him? The private scenes are where themes become personal. And one thing I appreciate about the premise is that it gives both characters plausible reasons to struggle with private softness. Lan Xian's privacy is already compromised by her position and by threats. Zhang Shao's privacy was never really his. He spent a decade training, likely under constant evaluation and discipline. Neither of them has lived a life where privacy equals peace. So their intimacy, if it develops, might be less about grand romantic gestures and more about the right to exhale, the right to be imperfect. Now, I want to be careful again not to invent episode beats, but let's talk about mid-season shift energy, because the storyline's structure implies one. When a conspiracy becomes clear, the whole genre flavor often changes. Early on, it's personal threat. Later on, it's systemic threat. Early on, it's someone's trying to kill her. Later on, it's someone's trying to control her world. And that shift is when the romance either gets sidelined or becomes more intense depending on writing choices. I prefer when it becomes more intense, not because I want melodrama, but because higher stakes should force emotional clarity. When the world becomes unstable, people stop wasting time on pretense. So if the show is doing its job, the conspiracy arc should peel away some of Lan Xian's professional armor and some of Zhang Shao's stoic discipline. Not completely. Growth isn't personality erasure, but enough that you see them change in response to each other. And the biggest change I want for Zhang Shaohu is this. I want him to stop equating love with constant vigilance. Because vigilance can be a form of anxiety. It can be a way to avoid feeling. If you're always scanning for threat, you don't have to sit with your own longing. So when he learns to trust, it should look like him allowing himself to rest. And that's harder for him than any fight. A trained fighter can fight. Rest is the skill he doesn't have. There's a scene type, again, not claiming it literally happens, just describing what the premise supports that would absolutely wreck me in the best way. A moment where Lan Xian catches him asleep, accidentally, still in his protective posture. Like he's sitting rather than lying down, or he's positioned where he can hear the door. And instead of teasing him, she quietly adjusts something, turns down a light, places a blanket, reduces noise without waking him, because she realizes his body doesn't know how to feel safe. That's love. Not fireworks. That. And if you're thinking, okay, that's a little soft, remember, softness is radical for people who have lived in survival mode. Rehook. The best romantic payoff in this story might be the first time Zhang Shaohu chooses himself without thinking it's selfish. Because if he spent 10 years training, he might have internalized that self-denial equals virtue. And self-denial can look noble while quietly destroying you. Lan Xine, as someone who has likely sacrificed a lot for success, might also be trapped in that belief. So their love can become a shared unlearning. You can be devoted without disappearing. Now, let's pivot to music and atmosphere again, because thrillers and romances use music differently, and mixing them is tricky. In thrillers, music often drives tension. In romances, music often signals emotion. When you blend them, the temptation is to overscore everything so the audience always knows what to feel. But the more confident approach is to trust your actors and let the score arrive sparingly at moments of genuine shift. The first time Lan Xine softens. The first time Zheng Xiao smiles without forcing it. The moment trust becomes explicit. The mother awakening, if handled delicately, could be scored in a way that doesn't manipulate, something simple, almost restrained. And even more important than music is the way a show uses ambient sound to build intimacy. A quiet room can be romantic. A quiet room can be terrifying. The difference is context. Are they quiet because they're safe, or quiet because they're waiting for violence? A strong director can use the same silence for both, which keeps you on edge in the best way. Another craft element: costuming and styling. A mountain-trained fighter entering a high-status world can be visually framed as either out of place or as quietly magnetic. The show can dress him in a way that emphasizes his discipline, clean lines, practical clothing, while dressing Lan Xine in polished authority. Over time, styling can soften as the characters soften, or it can sharpen as threats increase. Those choices communicate arc without dialogue. And for Lan Xine, wardrobe can also be armor. Powerful women often use clothing as a statement. Competence, control, distance. If the romance is real, you might see moments where she chooses comfort over image in private. That's not she's becoming less powerful. That's she's allowing herself to be a person. Rehook. Every time the drama shows Lan Xine alone, it has a chance to tell you who she really is beneath the director title. Because director is a role. But who is she when she's not directing? Does she have loneliness she refuses to name? Does she have fear she hides with sharpness? Does she have a tenderness that's been starved out by pressure? And who is Zheng Xiao when he's not guarding? Is he curious? Is he playful? Is he awkward? Is he sad? Can he want without apologizing? These are the questions that separate a romance that's functional from one that's transformative. Now, I'm going to say something that might sound like a critique, but is actually a compliment. Sang Ahli Pengawal, by premise, risks being too clean at the end. Foils the conspiracy, awakens his mother, gets love and success. That's a lot of resolution. And I'm not against resolution. I like being satisfied. But a story that resolves everything can sometimes feel like it's afraid of lingering complexity. So the show has to make those resolutions feel emotionally complicated, even if they're narratively positive. Foiling a conspiracy can still leave scars. Waking a mother can still leave grief for lost time. Love can still carry fear of loss. Success can still bring new threats. If the drama acknowledges that if it lets happiness have texture, then the wins don't feel fake. They feel earned. And I think that's where my stance on this series lands so far. The premise is tropey, yes, but the ingredients are the kind that can produce something richer than the sum of its parts if the show respects emotional realism. It doesn't have to be grim. It just has to be honest. Rehook. The most memorable dramas aren't the ones with the biggest twists. They're the ones that make you recognize yourself in a character you didn't expect to relate to. And that's the sneaky magic of Zheng Xiao. Most of us haven't trained for 10 years on a mountain. But a lot of us know what it feels like to spend years becoming useful and then wake up and realize we don't know how to be loved. That's the universal translation of his arc. Okay, let's get into the romance mechanics a little more deeply. Because I think Sang Ahli Pengawal's setup invites a particular kind of slow burn without needing to drag. The bodyguard arrangement forces proximity, but professionalism forces distance. That's the push-pull. And the best scenes are the ones where the boundary is tested but not broken, where they hover at the edge. For Zhang Xiao, the professionalism is likely a lifeline. It tells him where to stand, what to do, how to behave. It gives him rules, so he doesn't have to confront the chaos of feelings. For Lan Xine, professionalism is also a shield. It keeps things clean. It keeps her from risking vulnerability in a world where vulnerability is punished. So when the romance advances, it should feel like both of them stepping out of safety at the same time. If one of them steps out alone, it becomes unbalanced. It becomes pursuit. And pursuit can be romantic for a minute, but it gets uncomfortable fast if it's one-sided. The most satisfying progression is mutual. She chooses a moment of softness, he receives it without grasping. He chooses a moment of honesty, she receives it without weaponizing. And yes, I'm talking about weaponizing because in high-status environments, people learn to use information. They learn to use secrets. A drama that respects Lan Xine will show that she's capable of that, but that she chooses not to do it to him once she trusts him. That choice is intimacy. Rehook. The instant they stop performing for each other is the instant the romance becomes real. Because performance is safer than authenticity. Performance is controlled. Authenticity is messy. Now, about the action side again. One of the easiest ways for a bodyguard drama to keep stakes high is to constantly threaten the female lead. But that can become repetitive and, honestly, kind of exhausting. The better approach is to diversify what's threatened. Threaten her reputation. Threaten her autonomy. Threaten the people around her. Threaten Zhang Xiao's place in her life. Threaten his mother's storyline by pulling him away at a crucial emotional moment. Threaten their trust by manipulating information. Those are all threats that don't require the show to constantly escalate into bigger and bigger physical attacks. And when physical attacks do happen, they hit harder if they're not constant. That's why I'm interested in how the show uses the rival family. Rival families are perfect for non-physical threats. They can apply pressure through institutions, influence, and rumor. They can create dilemmas rather than fights. They can force Lan Xine to make choices that are morally gray. And morally gray choices are where character gets interesting. Because if Lan Xine is always purely righteous, she becomes a symbol rather than a person. But if she's occasionally forced to compromise without becoming unethical in a way that betrays her core, then she becomes real. And Zhang Xiao's reaction to her compromises will tell you whether he loves her or loves an idealized version of her. This is a big one. Can he love her when she's strategic? Can he love her when she's imperfect? Can he love her when she chooses a path he wouldn't choose? If the answer is yes, that's mature love. If the answer is no, then the romance is conditional. Rehook. The rival family isn't just there to threaten them, it's there to tempt them. Because power structures don't only crush you. They offer you deals. They offer you shortcuts. They offer you safety at the price of your soul. So, foiling a conspiracy could also involve moments where characters are offered compromises. And those are the moments I crave in drama. When a character says no to something that would make their life easier because they've decided who they are. Zhang Xiao's no might be refusing to become someone's weapon in a political game. Lan Xine's no might be refusing to sacrifice someone else's well-being for her own safety. Or refusing to treat Zhang Xiao as disposable. Again, not claiming specifics, just describing the kinds of moral beats the premise invites. Now, I want to talk about something that's quietly radical if the show does it. Letting Lan Xine protect Zhang Xiao. Not in a, she suddenly becomes a fighter way. In a social way. In a choice way. In a loyalty way. If she's a director with influence, she can protect him from the world that would chew him up. She can open doors. She can give him legitimacy. She can shield him from consequences that he wouldn't even see coming because his mountain training didn't include corporate politics. And there's something deeply romantic about that reversal. It breaks the gendered expectation that protection is male to female only. It also ties directly into the success ending. If Zhang Xiaohu becomes successful in the city, it might not only be because he's competent. It might be because someone believed in him, guided him, sponsored him, made space for him. That's a kind of love story people don't talk about enough. The love story where you help someone build a life. And if you want to make me emotional on camera, that's how you do it. Give me romance as mutual elevation, not rescue. Rehook. The real fantasy isn't that someone would fight for you. It's that someone would invest in you. Because fighting is dramatic. Investing is long-term. Investing says, I see a future with you. Now, let's revisit Zhang Xiaohu's internal arc in a more psychological lens. 10 years of training suggests a life where emotions were either disciplined or suppressed. Often, characters like this have a hyper-functional outer shell and an underdeveloped inner vocabulary. They can name tactics, but not feelings. They can endure pain, but not articulate loneliness. So if the drama wants to make his seeking love premise feel sincere, it has to show him struggling to express what he wants in a way that isn't purely action. This is where dialogue matters. Not in a poetic confession way, but in the awkward, halting way real people speak when they're trying to say something that scares them. It's also where the actor playing Zhang Xiaohu would need to do a lot with very little. Micro-expressions, timing, breathing, the way the jaw tightens before a vulnerable sentence, the way the eyes flick away when he's caught wanting. If the performance leans too cool, the yearning disappears. If it leans too broad, it becomes comedy. The sweet spot is sincerity with restraint. Lan Ixion's performance challenge is different. Powerful women characters often get written as either icy or secretly childish. The better writing lets her be complex, decisive but not emotionless, guarded but not cruel, ambitious but not shallow. She should be allowed to have fear without being reduced by it. And crucially, she should be allowed to want. Because desire is often denied to high-status professional women characters. They're allowed to be objects of desire, but not subjects of desire. If the drama lets Lan Xion actively choose Zhang Xiaohu, not as a reaction, not as gratitude, but as genuine attraction and admiration, that's when the romance feels equitable. Rehook. Gratitude is not romance, and the show has to know the difference. Because it's very easy to accidentally write a love story where Lan Xion falls because he saved her. That's gratitude. Romance is when she sees him in non-hero moments and still chooses him. When she notices his gentleness, his integrity, his awkward sincerity. When she respects him. And Zhang Xiaohu should also choose Lan Xion for more than beauty or status. He should choose her because he sees her strength, her mind, her stubbornness, her loneliness. Because he likes who she is, not just that she's the first woman he met after leaving the mountain. That mutual seeing is the point. Now, I want to linger on the mother awakening again, but from Lan Xion's perspective. If Lan Xion witnesses any part of Zhang Xiao's family wound, it can be the moment she understands him in a way she couldn't before. Not as the guard, as the man. And there's a particular kind of tenderness that happens when you see someone you rely on become vulnerable. It can be destabilizing because you realize they're not invincible. It can also be bonding because you realize you're not the only one afraid. If Lan Xion, a woman who is targeted and pressured, sees Zhang Xiao's fear around his mother, she might feel less alone in her own fear. She might realize that strength isn't the absence of vulnerability. It's the ability to carry it. And that's the kind of emotional exchange that makes romances feel adult. Rehook. When two strong people fall in love, it's not fireworks, it's finally admitting they're tired. That's a line I stand by. Strength, especially in high-pressure roles, can become a performance you can't drop. So love becomes the place where you can drop it, carefully, with someone safe. Now, about success. I want to unpack it because it's in the storyline, and it's easy to treat it like a generic happy ending word. Success can mean a lot of things. It can mean money. It can mean status. It can mean career accomplishment. It can mean competence recognized by the world. It can mean stability. For Zhang Xiaohu, success could be integration into society. It could be him finding a place where his skills are valuable without being destructive. It could be him being seen as more than a weapon. For Lan Xine, success could mean surviving the conspiracy and rival family threats without losing her position or without losing herself. It could mean reclaiming her authority. It could mean having a future that isn't defined by fear. And for the Romans, success could mean they find a way to be together that doesn't erase either person's identity. That's why I actually like that the storyline pairs love with success. It suggests the drama is interested in holistic fulfillment. Not just they fall in love and nothing else matters. It matters. Work matters. Family matters. Healing matters. I'm always more moved by stories where love doesn't replace life. Love joins life. Rehook. If the show treats love like an escape hatch, it'll feel shallow. If it treats love like a foundation, it'll feel earned. Now, let's talk about the pacing challenge again. Because to get to a place where he foils a conspiracy, awakens his mother, and wins love and success, the drama has to handle multiple arcs without making any one of them feel like filler. A strong long-form script strategy in dramas like this is braided plotting. The external plot, assassins, rival family, conspiracy, and internal plot, romance, personal healing, family, should constantly feed each other. External pressure forces internal change. Internal change creates new external strategies. So when Zhang Xiaohu grows emotionally, it should affect how he protects. When Lan Xine opens up, it should affect how she navigates power. When the mother thread progresses, it should change Zhang Xiaohu's priorities. When romance deepens, it should become both a strength and a vulnerability in the external conflict. If the show does that, it won't feel like separate storylines. It'll feel like one life. Now, a quick lightly humorous human aside, because I can't pretend I'm above genre pleasure. There's a particular flavor of scene in bodyguard dramas, where the guard gives the protected person a look like, "Do not do that," and the protected person gives a look back like, "Watch me," and somehow that's foreplay. I don't know why. It's ridiculous. It's also effective. That push-pull, when it's grounded in respect, is chemistry you can bottle. But again, respect is the key. If it turns into him scolding her like a child, it's dead. If it turns into her humiliating him, it's dead. The tension should come from two adults with strong wills trying to align, not from dominance games. Rehook, chemistry is easy to write. Mutual respect is harder, and it's the thing that makes chemistry safe to enjoy. Now, I want to go deeper into why the mountain training backstory is such a strong emotional metaphor. Mountains in stories often symbolize purity, isolation, tradition, and singular purpose. Descending into the city symbolize complexity, compromise, temptation, and multiplicity of purpose. So Zhang Xiaohu's journey is not just geographic. It's existential. He's moving from a life where purpose was given to him to a life where purpose has to be chosen. Training for 10 years means he's been living someone else's plan, even if he consented to it. Coming down to seek love means he's trying to write his own life. And the drama can use Lan Xine as the embodiment of chosen purpose. A director is someone who directs. She is someone who makes decisions that shape reality. So Zhang Xiaohu falling for her can also be him falling for the concept of agency. That's romantic on a thematic level. He's drawn to the thing he lacks. And Lan Xine being drawn to him can be her being drawn to sincerity, to the kind of directness that her world often lacks, to someone who isn't playing 4 games at once. So they're not just attracted, they're complementary. Rehook. The best romances aren't between opposites. They're between people who each hold a missing piece of the other's life. Now, I've praised the premise a lot, but I also want to acknowledge the potential pitfalls again, Because loving a drama doesn't mean pretending it's flawless. One pitfall is over-idealizing Jung Shaohu. If the show makes him morally perfect, emotionally pure, always right, always patient, he becomes less of a person and more of a wish. And wishes don't grow. People grow. Another pitfall is underdeveloping Lan Xine. If the show treats her as a prize at the end of a male hero's journey, it betrays the very thing that makes director Lan Xine compelling. A third pitfall is using the mother awakening as a cheap, emotional lever rather than a genuine arc. If the show rushes it or uses it only to add tears, it will feel manipulative. And a fourth pitfall is the conspiracy swallowing the romance. If the story becomes so plot-dense that the relationship feels like it's happening in the margins, then the seeking love premise becomes a marketing hook rather than a narrative truth. But the good news is, the storyline as given suggests the drama is at least aware of its emotional endpoints. Love, mother, success. Those are human anchors. Rehook. As long as the show keeps returning to what does this do to them, the plot can get as wild as it wants. Because viewers don't remember the exact mechanics of a conspiracy. They remember how the characters looked when they realized something. They remember the silence after choice. They remember who held whose hand. Let's imagine, in broad strokes, what foiling the conspiracy can do to the romance without inventing details. When conspiracies are revealed, characters often realize they've been used. And being used is humiliating. It makes you angry. It makes you distrust your own judgment. It can also make you cling to the one person you think is real. Lan Xine initiating doesn't have to mean she chases him. It can mean she's the one who asks a personal question first. The one who checks on him. The one who sets a boundary and then later invites him closer. The one who chooses vulnerability when it would be easier to stay armored. Jung Shaohu initiating can mean he admits want without shame. He asks rather than assumes. He respects her choices even when they scare him. Those are the steps that matter. Now, let's talk about the broader theme of masculinity here, because it's unavoidable with a trained protector led. A lot of dramas equate masculinity with violence. They romanticize the idea that a man proves love by being dangerous. But there's a healthier fantasy available, that a man proves love by being safe. Safe doesn't mean weak. Safe means regulated. Safe means respectful. Safe means he can hold power without leaking it onto you. Safe means he can fight when necessary and stop when it's not. And if Jung Shao's arc moves toward that kind of masculinity, if he becomes not just a weapon, but a safe place, then the romance is not just entertaining. It's nourishing. Rehook. The best bodyguard is not the one who can kill. It's the one who can choose not to. Now, I'm going to pivot to the mother awakening one last time for this segment, because it's where the show can either become genuinely profound or just melodramatic. Awakening is not only physical, it's emotional. It's relational. When a parent wakes, it can mean the possibility of closure, but it can also mean the start of something complicated. Because waking up doesn't erase the years lost. So a sincere drama would allow mixed emotions, joy and grief together, relief and anger, love and resentment. That mix is real. If the show allows Jung Shaohu to have complicated feelings toward his mother's situation without making him look ungrateful, that would be brave. And if Lan Xine witnesses that complexity and doesn't flinch, it could deepen their intimacy in a way that romance tropes rarely capture. Because being loved when you're messy is the real prize. Rehook. Happiness that doesn't allow sadness is not happiness. It's denial. So if the show ends with love and success, I want it to still allow the residue of what they went through. Not to ruin the ending, but to make it honest. Now, since I've been building a lot of emotional analysis, I want to bring it back to pure entertainment value for a moment, because you are also, presumably, watching a drama to be entertained. The premise promises action, danger, high-stakes power games, and romance. That combination works when the show maintains momentum. Momentum, in this context, doesn't mean constant events. It means each scene changes something. It moves a relationship, it reveals a motive, it deepens a fear, it creates a consequence. The worst thing a thriller romance can do is spin. Scenes that repeat the same beat, someone threatens, someone protects, someone sighs, without evolving. The best ones evolve in small increments. A new layer of trust, a new boundary, a new piece of the conspiracy, a new cost. And because the storyline includes a conspiracy and rival family, there's plenty of room for that evolution on the plot side. The challenge is matching it on the emotional side so the romance keeps pace. Rehook. The plot should complicate the romance, and the romance should complicate the plot. That's the braid. If Lan Xine starts caring about Zheng Xiaohu, she might make riskier choices to protect him. If Zheng Xiaohu starts caring deeply, he might make choices that compromise his professionalism, which could have consequences in Lan Xine's world. Those complications make both arcs feel real. Now, at this point, you might be thinking, okay, but do I actually recommend it? I'm not wrapping anything up yet, because I don't want to cheapen the discussion into a quick thumbs up or down when this premise has so many moving parts that deserve attention. And honestly, the reason I'm still talking is because Ahli Pengawal is the kind of drama that lives in the details. It's not the premise that makes it hit. It's whether the show respects the humanity inside the premise. And that brings me to the most important value I bring as a reviewer on Flick Flair. I care less about whether a drama is original and more about whether it's honest. Tropes are fine. Tropes are comfort. Tropes are storytelling shorthand. But honesty is what makes a trope feel like it belongs to these characters rather than feeling like they belong to the trope. So I'm watching for honesty in 3 places. Honesty in Lan Xine's agency. Honesty in Zheng Xiaohu's emotional growth. Honesty in the way the show portrays danger as costly rather than glamorous. If those 3 hit, the drama can be extremely satisfying without needing to reinvent the wheel. Rehook. The wheel doesn't need reinventing if the road feels real. Now, I'm going to keep living in the relationship for a bit longer because, frankly, it's the most interesting part of the storyline. He becomes her bodyguard is an arrangement. Arrangements create rules. Rules create tension. And tension is where romance breathes. So what are the likely rules? He stays close. He doesn't touch unless necessary. He doesn't get emotionally involved. She doesn't let him become a distraction. She doesn't reveal too much. She doesn't depend on him. Those rules, whether stated or implied, are going to crack. Not because they're weak, but because humans are not built for clean boundaries under shared stress. And the crack moments are the best. The moments where someone crosses a line and realizes it after. The moment where she reaches for him without thinking. The moment where he says her name differently. The moment where he forgets to be formal. The moment where she notices him bleeding, physically or emotionally, and her director mask drops for half a second. Those half seconds are what viewers replay. Rehook. Love in a bodyguard drama is often a series of accidents that reveal intention. Now, I want to address something about rival family dynamics and romance optics because this can become a really compelling conflict if the show leans into it. Powerful rivals don't just attack you. They frame you. They narrate you. They tell the world who you are. So if Lan Xine becomes romantically linked with Zheng Xiaohu, that relationship can be used against her. It can be framed as weakness. It can be framed as impropriety. It can be framed as dependency. It can be weaponized. And if Zheng Xiaohu is not used to being a public figure, he might not understand that simply existing near her can create political consequences. That's another reason why a success for him might require learning social rules, not because he must conform, but because he must understand the battlefield he's on. That kind of learning arc is interesting because it's not about losing authenticity. It's about gaining awareness. And Lan Xine, if she cares about him, might try to shield him from that world. She might try to keep him out of the spotlight to protect his privacy, to prevent him from being targeted, which creates another relationship tension. She protects him by distancing him. He experiences that as rejection, not because he's immature, but because distance hurts. That's a real adult conflict. I'm pushing you away to protect you. I don't want safety that costs us. If the drama gives us that, and resolves it through honest conversation rather than melodrama, it earns my respect. Rehook. The strongest couples aren't the ones who never clash. They're the ones who can clash without breaking trust. Now, at a certain point, foiling a conspiracy means someone has to take a stand. And stands have consequences. So the show's final stretch, again, speaking generally, should feel like a convergence. External conflict reaches peak intensity, internal conflicts demand resolution, and the character's growth is tested in action. This is where I want Zhang Shao's emotional growth to be visible not in a speech, but in behavior. In the way he consults Lan Exine rather than deciding. In the way he accepts her plan. In the way he controls his protective impulses when they'd become controlling. In the way he chooses partnership over martyrdom. And for Lan Exine, I want her growth to be visible in the way she lets herself be supported without feeling diminished. In the way she chooses him without turning him into a secret shame. In the way she trusts him with her fear rather than hiding it under competence. If both arcs land, then love and success becomes a believable outcome. Not a fairy tale, but a hard-earned integration. Rehook. The ending only works if the characters are different people than they were at the start. Now, I'm going to stop here at a point that feels like another hinge, because from here the conversation naturally moves into endgame territory, how a drama like this sticks the landing emotionally, how it handles the balance of romance payoff versus plot payoff, and what kind of viewer it ultimately satisfies. And I want to give that the space it deserves rather than racing into a verdict before the story's themes have fully finished unfolding.